everybody, to a new edition of Let's Do Lunch. Today is Thursday, which is our RightsTech Roundtable Day, and we have a terrific show for you today. Before I introduce our speakers, let me invite you to introduce yourselves. Please go to the chat and select the drop down for everyone, so everyone can see introductions. And tell us a little bit about yourself, or drop in your LinkedIn. It's a great way to meet people during the show. And also to comment and make observations during the show. If you have questions for the panel, please put them in the Q&A area, which is just to the left of the chat on the bottom nav. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. I think, as you know, if you've been to the show before, that we run 45 minutes. So depending on where you are, East Coast, West Coast, will be done at 45 past the hour. And let me introduce first our moderator today. Paul Sweeting is CEO of Concurrent Media Strategies and is also co-founder of the RightsTech project. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Ned. Hello, everyone. Good to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Yeah, we have what I think is going to be a terrific conversation in store for you today. Before I get to that, though, a couple of quick headlines from the world of RightsTech. On Tuesday of this week, the UK Competition and Markets Authority announced that it would undertake what it called a market study of the music streaming business. This grew out of the report that the DCMS committee in Parliament produced several weeks back, which was a fairly scathing report on the economics of the current economics of the music streaming business, and made a number of recommendations to pretty dramatically overhaul how that business operates. That report was then sent to the full government, which sort of said, the government's response was basically, meh, we don't see that much here. But if the competition authority wants to take it up, that's up to them. Well, now they have. This is a market study. This is one step shy of a formal investigation. But the focus of the study is on the dominance of the market by the three major labels and major publishers, and whether or not they're using that dominance in such a way as to be to the detriment of artists as well as independent labels. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. And the other headline for today, actually, the Facebook announced that it had reached a licensing deal with a consortium or an alliance of small and medium-sized news publishers in France. This is in keeping with an initiative that the French government undertook a few months ago to try to compel, essentially, digital platforms like Facebook and Google to license the content, the news content that they share on their platform, and to make payments to the publishers, which is in turn in keeping with the European Copyright Directive, Article 15, which creates a neighboring right for news publishers. And I mentioned last week that the US Copyright Office has begun a study, put out a request for comment on the possibility of creating a neighboring right for news publishers here in the US. The other interesting thing about the Facebook announcement today is that it was the product of essentially collective bargaining. This was a group of separate news organizations coming together to negotiate collectively with Facebook, and that's very much in line with what the Journalism Competition and Protection Act here in the US contemplates. If that were to pass, it would essentially create an exemption, an antitrust exemption for news organizations to negotiate collectively with Facebook, Google, and other platforms. So that's also worth keeping an eye on. And speaking of news, our guest today, Arjun Mendhi, who I'd like to ask to join us, made some news today. Hi, Arjun.
Hi there.
Arjun is the founder and CEO of a company called MOLTEN, which is based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, across the street from the MIT Media Lab, to which it has some DNA connections, I guess, would be one way to put it. And MOLTEN has built a platform, a cloud-based platform, to enable media companies, rights owners, to integrate rights management, content management, and financial management, essentially accounting, into a seamless whole. So taking sort of these siloed, what has been siloed operations and stitching them together in order to facilitate the management and licensing of rights at scale, which is very much at the heart of what we focus on here at the RightsTech project. And prior to starting MOLTEN, Arjun was a technology and business operations executive at a number of different organizations and companies, including the publicly traded company Danaher, and startups like Infinite Analytics. He is a two-time winner of the MIT Web and IT Award, and holds an MBA from MIT Sloan. So welcome, Arjun. Not to step on your lines, but of course the big news today that you announced was a seed round, fundraising round, $7 million. And a number of prominent investors were involved in that fundraising round, including Jack Dorsey, the founder and CEO of Twitter, Michael Ovitz, the one-time head of CAA and one-time chairman of Disney, or CEO of Disney, Ashton Kutcher, the actor and tech investor, as well as a number of other prominent investors. So pretty impressive lineup there for you, Arjun. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So tell us about what problem you were trying to solve with MOLTEN, and how did you go about doing it? Yeah.
Well, first off, really excited to be here. Rights management is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I can go on for hours about this, and you'll get a little sneak peek into that today. So excited to talk to people who are fascinated by this field. And I think one of the attempts at MOLTEN is to throw more light at innovation in the space of rights management and why it is important today. So to start off, the problem that we solve is essentially a problem of lack of innovation and fragmentation of the operations today in most media companies. So, it is a byproduct of the steady evolution of ways of consumption of media. So as consumers move from, largely linear-based television or satellite-based media consumption, and in our world, we focus a lot on film and TV, so you'll see me gravitate towards that. As consumers move from, linear consumption to on-demand consumption, it has ramifications on the back office operations. It took many decades to build out infrastructure for satellite and broadcast distribution of content, and now we need to start from scratch and build that infrastructure on the cloud. And what has happened over the last couple of decades is, consumers have always led change. And in this case as well, consumers have started consuming content on demand and online. But the pieces of infrastructure that are required for all the internal and back office components of the value chain are yet to evolve and modernize. So what we're seeing typically, in the film and TV space is a sort of a piecemeal approach. Every media company is dealing with dozens of different tools and solutions, one for rights, one for content storage, one for content encoding, one for delivery of content, one for screeners, one for avails management. So the layers and layers just keep adding, and then they add service providers on it. And at the end of the day, it becomes slow, inefficient, and very, very expensive. So that's really the problem that MOLTEN's solving, is to modernize those back office operations so media companies can distribute their content more widely and maintain more insight and control over that content globally.
So as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, what MOLTEN does essentially is it creates a new data layer that crosses all of those different operations, and then that data layer feeds a series of apps that you're building, and presumably other developers will at some point be able to build. Is that roughly the architecture?
Yep, your intuition is correct there. So even though MOLTEN has just gotten some press, we've been working on this problem for a very long time. Personally, I filed my first patent in rights management in the year 2012, so it's been a decade-long fascination for me. And the way MOLTEN goes about creating this solution is a little different from how most applications are built. We first started by building a platform, and then the applications came on top of the platform. And the reason for doing that was because if you're going to address the problem of fragmentation of operations, we first need to have a system that can integrate the data pipelines, make that data usable, and then make that interaction easy through customizable applications. So one mental model to think of how MOLTEN's built is, you look at your iPhone and you have a bunch of apps on it. All those apps are running on iOS, which is the operating system. So MOLTEN is similar, but in a cloud-based environment. So we have something called the MOLTEN Data Cloud. That is a technology layer that we built. It is a multi-cloud orchestration layer. This is the layer that ingests data pipelines, whether that is your rights information or your contracts or revenue data from 6 streaming platforms around the world. Whatever the data pipelines are, MOLTEN Data Cloud ingests all of it. It is also integrated with the top cloud platforms of the world. So depending on how your content management architecture works, it sort of puts it all together. And then once the data is in there and normalized and usable, it can be used, or your teams can interact with that data through a series of different applications that we've created. So we have an application for rights management for film and TV. That's where you can run advanced search, compute avails in real time, export the data in any platform specifications like Roku, Netflix, Tubi, do things that would normally take teams of people, weeks of paper shuffling, down to seconds or milliseconds. So that's the rights management application that seamlessly connects with the contracts management application, which is where all the contracts are documented, digitized. The waterfall information is captured there in pretty flexible manner, where it's all customizable depending on how the contracts are structured, and so on. So there are apps for content packaging and delivery. There is an app for buying and selling and offers management. There's an app for financial reporting. And over time, MOLTEN will only get better and create more applications. And this level of modularity becomes really beneficial for companies that don't need everything and they just want to start with, 1 or 2 applications, but over time, they can envision themselves using other components and they don't want to go through a whole onboarding and integration exercise.
And can companies design their own apps and build their own apps, or are you generating all of the?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, that's the long-term vision where MOLTEN is able to power independently developed applications. And, this decoupling of the data cloud with the application cloud is pivotal to that architecture, to that capability. Today, there are independent applications that are running on MOLTEN, but in a sort of a pseudo-controlled environment, where they are our customers who want to build their own applications. There are some companies that have very specific workflows of how they manage their data. They use third-party tools like, some data dashboards and other data processing tools, and they really need that pipeline to continue even through MOLTEN. So they use our APIs to create their custom apps or power their custom workflows in addition to the apps that are running on MOLTEN.
So who are, you've been in beta for a little while now. You have customers who are live with the product. Can you talk at all about who some of them are?
Oh, definitely. If you go to our website, you'll see various customers that we have listed over there. The website is moltencloud.com. And, at this point, we typically work with film and TV companies, as I mentioned, and within film and TV, a lot of our focus is on the content supply side. So that's the production companies and the distribution companies. Given that we do power content delivery globally, it became important for us to have infrastructure across the world. So at this point, we have customers from, I believe, all 6 continents of the world. And, a few good examples would be companies like Indie Rights, which is an IFTA member. Indie Rights is an independent film distribution company based in LA. There are various other distribution and production companies as well, but I think Indie Rights is a great example of, a mid-market company that represents independent artists, which I personally think is, an area that has been underserved through technological innovation. So Indie Rights has been on MOLTEN for, I believe, about 1.5 to 2 years at this point. And they have scaled, the last I checked with them, about 5 to 10x their size in this period that they've been with MOLTEN, without actually investing in, scaling up teams and offices and workplaces. They went from a life where they had stacks of contracts and stacks of hard disks in their office and, lists of avails with highlighters to really digitizing all their workflows in a cloud environment. And, we feel privileged to have an opportunity to help companies like Indie Rights scale and make them competitive in this evolving, media industry. With every big change like the one we're seeing now, comes a lot of opportunity and a lot of shuffling, right? So some companies are going to make it big who adapt quickly, and then some companies will not be able to survive. And we feel like MOLTEN is giving them a competitive edge, which makes us feel really proud of the work we do.
So how did you mentioned at the top that, rights management is sort of an obsession of yours.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah, it is a strange field to be obsessed about. And that's why I feel great to be on this call, where I suppose most people have that obsession, or at least that interest. For me personally, it started with early on in my career. I was, a computer engineer by day. I was coding, and I was also a self-taught musician. So by night, I would play guitar in a rock band, and we would do gigs at cafes and anywhere. We started out saying, we'll play for food. So big 5-star hotels would invite us to perform over there, and we just get a drink and dinner. And that was a great way to spend the evening, because if you didn't play there, we would be playing in our studio anyway. So it started out as a really fun hobby endeavor. And within a year or so, we got really popular. And we were doing concerts sometimes with thousands of people in the audience, and started getting approached by record labels and producers. And that was the first time I was introduced to the mechanics of the larger media ecosystem, the commercial side of the industry. And I started asking questions, which seemed pretty obvious to me, but I didn't get obvious answers, like who owns the rights, who determines, where this content goes, who determines the commercial terms under which it will be monetized, and how does the value flow, and all those mechanical questions about the value chain. And I had no background in that field at the time, and this is the year 2008, so a while back. So I eventually decided I didn't want to pursue music as a career option and go professional. So I did what any reasonable engineer would do. I started a robotics company, and life went in a different direction. But it left an impression on me. So, after my stint at the robotics company, I found myself at MIT. I was doing my MBA, and I had the headspace to really think about areas that I was interested in. And within 1 month of getting to MIT, I filed my first patent in rights management. And over the next, say, 8 years or so, I worked at different companies like Google and Danaher, and until before MOLTEN, I was in a data analytics company. And I developed more and more skills and learned more technologies in the wider cloud ecosystem. And every time I learned something new, I would go back to what I saw in the media industry and start thinking about, what that innovation or what that technology could do for the media value chain. So in the year 2017, I just was so obsessed with this idea that I quit my job and spent the entire summer researching different media types. I looked at books, images, video, VR, commercial, film and TV versus user-generated content, gaming, and so on. And I realized there was an inflection point here. The type that happens once in a few decades. The last great innovation or migration of infrastructure that I saw in the media space was, with the dot-com boom that led to the emergence of Spotify and Netflix and other streaming platforms. And now I think we're going to see a complete rewiring of the back office operations. And in the introduction, you mentioned governments are starting to take an interest in this. Interest is there from different commercial entities and non-commercial entities today to really rethink this, because we're in a digital ecosystem where, when you go to a web page and you see an ad on the web page, that ad went through a live auction, and one of many ads won that auction. The price for that ad was determined in real time. The ad was rendered on the web page, and the payments were accounted for, all done in about 300 milliseconds. And in that day and age, we're living in a time where to share a clip from a song or a video, you need to go through a 6-month licensing process. So I think that inflection point is here. We're just looking at sort of a lag from the technology perspective. And that's, where I felt I could make a meaningful impact in this industry, and started MOLTEN to do that.
So why film and television? I mean, your initial engagement with the media industry was music.
Yeah.
And Lord knows the music industry has plenty of problems in this area. Why film and television?
Yeah, MOLTEN is built as a general purpose intellectual property management system. So as I said, I compared it to an operating system. So we built it to work with any digital asset. And even today, there are pockets of users who use it for podcasts and music and elemental rights and things like that, images, and somebody's even doing graphic novels on it. So there are a variety of use cases even today, but the dominant use case is in the film and television space. And that emerged as a winner when, early on in MOLTEN's life, we started piloting this technology in different verticals to see what problems was this solving realistically, and how the industry was reacting to it. There were a few differences that surfaced between music and film and TV. The first one was the level of competitive differentiation that's based on rights is much higher in the film and TV space. What I mean by that is if you
it's driven by exclusive content. That's
exactly
the game.
Yeah. So that's one big difference. The second big difference was that in addition to the growing complexity of rights and the growing number of outlets where this content needed to be, there was also a growing complexity on the resolution and storage requirements of this content. So, we moved from HD to 4K, and that has multiplied the amount of infrastructure that is required to manage this content. And that's not the same for audio content. So to put this in perspective, an uncompressed movie, say 1.5 hour long, in HD would be about 150 to 200 gigabytes. But in 4K, we are seeing individual movies go up to 7 terabytes, sometimes 10 terabytes. And if I were to send 10 terabytes from my house in Boston to someone in LA on my Xfinity broadband, it would take me 200 days. So given that we consume compressed content on streaming platforms, we don't recognize that the internet itself is not capable of handling the payloads of the back office needs for this infrastructure. So all this put together just made film and TV the most compelling place to start, particularly as we try to integrate these disparate components.
So let's talk about the fundraise. $7 million with a pretty impressive lineup of investors. How did that come about? How did you get connected with Jack Dorsey and Michael Ovitz?
Yeah, I feel this is one of the great privileges of working at MOLTEN, which is just working with incredible people who see the problem perhaps from different angles and are compelled to do something about it. That goes for our investors, our advisors, and even our team members. So when it comes specifically to investors, I think it just happened organically over a period of time. There wasn't that one day where I wanted to, meet 5 movers and shakers in the industry. As you go about building the platform, it gets surfaced in different ways. There are different media companies that use it. There are people who've been looking into this problem who discover the platform. And then one thing leads to another. And, I was introduced to people like Michael Ovitz, Ashton Kutcher, Jack Dorsey, of course, and various other really influential people in the industry. What I found that was amazing was most people looked at the same problem statement from different perspectives. And every time I spoke with, different stakeholders or different professionals from the industry, I would learn something new, looking at the problem statement from their angle. So, some people work predominantly in user-generated content space, and some people work predominantly in high-end Hollywood content space, and some people generally with, the independent content space. Some people work with talent. For example, Kevin Yorn, an influential attorney who represents top-tier talent in Hollywood, is also an advisor in the company. So, it helped us bring together a team, and I think of working with our investors as an extended team to help shape our perspective as technology builders and have a well-rounded perspective on the problem that we aim to solve. So that's how it all happened. And we closed the round just earlier this year, and right now we're just focused on execution on that vision.
Just a reminder to folks, if you do have questions for Arjun, please put them in the Q&A window, and we'll get to them in a few minutes. I had a couple other questions. So, what is the roadmap now? I mean, you have people who can open a lot of doors for you. I assume you've been demonstrating, pitching this around town in Hollywood, and other major production centers. What's the roadmap over the next 18 months, 24 months?
Yeah. As a startup, I think, what we do is really at the first principles level. It's really fundamental. As an early stage company, we're only doing two things. One, we're building products or services of value, and two, we're selling products or services of value. So whatever capital we've raised now is going to go down into these two areas of operations. The first is development of the technology. We plan to invest heavily into our research and development, hiring team members to develop the product and the solution and make it more comprehensive. And as we gain more users on the system, we also gain a wider diversity of requirements. So to be able to address the wider use cases and learn from these new users is the product priority. And then on the execution side, be able to demonstrate it effectively and also onboard companies in an effective manner. Many times we find ourselves, with more demand than we can handle, with more onboarding requirements than we can handle. And I think
good kind of problem to have.
Yeah, and that's a good signal that you're ready to scale up and go to the next level as a company. And as you can imagine, when companies come to the platform, they come with all sorts of implementations. Some companies are very sophisticated with half a dozen different softwares that house different components of their data and workflows. And then there are some that are working with paper documents and spreadsheets. So over time, we've tried to develop as much automation as we could, but I think now we plan to take that to the next level and further streamline the onboarding processes. So that's our priority right now.
So what is the business model for you? Is this a license model? Is it a subscription service? How does that actually work?
Yeah, it's just a software as a service. Companies pay us monthly to use the software. The amount they pay us is a factor of the services that they use. It is modular. It is sort of this multiple application-based system. So companies only pay for what they use. And then for any kind of infrastructure, whether it's storage or delivery of content or streaming of the content, it is just transparent metered pricing. The unit economics are a no-brainer for any company. Just by moving to MOLTEN, companies have reduced their delivery costs by over 80%. Their storage cost, even on just the cloud storage cost, by at least 20%, in many cases more. So there is a sort of a no-brainer on the infrastructure piece, and then the efficiencies from the software do make a compelling ROI case.
So you're looking at a lot of data that is coming through the platform. Are you collecting any data, or do you have plans to do any analytics of your own based on what you're looking at?
Yeah. Look, today we are very clear. We exist to empower the rights holders of media assets. And these rights holders are producers or distributors, depending on who we're working with. And once streaming companies license the content, they become the rights holders as well. So our purpose for existence today is to empower them with the insight and the tools that they need to do their businesses, to do their business operations. So to the extent that we can create analytics and dashboards that can be beneficial to these users, definitely, but we're also very strict about the confidentiality of this data. So there is no, cross movement of data between companies. Every company is guaranteed privacy of its information. So we have to walk that fine line. So far, we're hyper focused on just serving individual companies. But there are learnings that we get from the scale. Today we have about somewhere around 180 to 200 million rights on the platform. And by number of titles, that I think amounts to a decent percentage of all movies that exist on Earth. So at that scale, we are starting to see recurrent, repeating patterns. We're starting to see, underutilization of rights is a big problem. Say you're a distribution company, you acquire rights for 8-pack for, subscription on demand and advertising video on demand rights. And then your ability to go monetize those rights, is just limited by how many deals you can do. And most companies end up with at least 50 to sometimes 80% of all rights they have just sitting around unutilized. So we're starting to see patterns like that, which I think, at this scale are eventually going to lead to insights which can be beneficial to companies on how they monetize their rights.
So is that a second line of business for MOLTEN at some point?
I think it could just be an analytics app, that adds to the current suite of solutions, and companies can subscribe to things like that. But right now, as I said, just laser focused on, just taking the first step in digitizing those operations.
Very cool. We do have a couple of questions. Pinaki Chatterjee, probably butchered that. Greetings from Mumbai. Is MOLTEN available for silo individual or indie filmmakers / content creators, or only media and entertainment corporate companies?
Good question. It is available for anyone. It is not a DIY tool because it does require a level of onboarding. But we have, independent creators. The licensing fee for independent creators is very, very affordable. So yeah, we have independent users and we have companies.
And so you have a pricing, a rate card, as it were, that is driven by the amount of content that.
That is correct. So, generally we serve large organizations that have operations across multiple continents. But, one of the benefits of creating cloud technologies is our ability to sort of democratize that technology. And, even though we don't have a DIY product today where you can just go and sign up like, YouTube or something like that, it is something that remains on our radar to democratize this technology so much that any independent creator, hobby creators, or professional creators can also benefit from everything that we've built. And I think it's just going to happen over time. But today, even if there are small content creators, they can reach out to us with their requirements, and on a case-by-case basis, we can, give them accounts on the platform.
An anonymous attendee wonders, do you plan to tackle the music industry more intently than you have so far?
Perhaps over time. Right now, we are not working in the music space.
Because, I mean, the rights are, it's not an exclusive rights driven business the way film and television is, but
yeah.
Certainly the integration of other parts of a company's operations, I could see being of tremendous benefit to a lot of people in the music industry, even if the the rights are Spotify and Apple Music have essentially the same catalog of product, yeah. But the music industry certainly has some infrastructure-based challenges that around rights management and accounting,
yeah.
That is a big challenge for them.
Yeah, yeah. My take on that is MOLTEN is, as a technology, very capable of handling that, but we have to prioritize our energy as a small company and stay focused. So we picked a beachhead market, which is working great for us right now. It seems inevitable that MOLTEN will start being used for other types of media assets. As I mentioned, we onboard a company that is predominantly in film and TV, and then they start wondering, hey, we have that subsidiary that works in that space, and we have that relationship and that little catalog in that other space. Why don't we just put it all on MOLTEN? So as we start seeing that kind of adoption, I think it's just organic that people will stretch MOLTEN's ability into different media asset classes.
And of course, these days, IP assets don't stay in one silo. I mean, you see TV shows spawning podcasts. You see podcasts being licensed to turn into movies and TV shows. So it seems natural that just organically, you're going to find yourself operating in with a lot of different types of IP assets.
Yeah, that's possible.
So if people wanted to learn more or contact you, how would they best do that?
Yeah, just go to the website, Molten Cloud. Visualize a cloud of molten metal.
What is that? How did the name? I was a little puzzled by the name. What is the origins of the name?
Yeah, the origin of the name is, we wanted a name that symbolized our focus on building the core of the system and not building something peripheral to the problem. So we started thinking of ideas that represented core, and the Earth's core, the molten core, really resonated with us. It's hot, it's fluid, and without the core, you can really have nothing built on top of it. But with a strong core, you can build layers and layers of Earth and the atmosphere and economies, and life can thrive on it. But you need the core built first, and that was the idea behind the name. So molten is an analogy to the molten core of the Earth, and in this case, the molten core of the value chain.
Okay, very geological of you. So we're coming up on time. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on that I haven't asked you about so far? Are there?
Well, I think the final note would be anyone who's interested in the field of intellectual property management and operations, and is interested in talking to MOLTEN for whatever reason, whether you want to learn more about the platform or you want to contribute to the research and development in the space, we would love to hear from them. Our email address is easy, just contact@moltencloud.com. Shoot us a note, happy to connect with anyone. Whether or not you end up collaborating with MOLTEN or working with MOLTEN is immaterial. If you're interested in the space and interested in the research in the space, we'd love to meet up and learn more about people who are in the space.
Still playing guitar?
I don't do that as much anymore. My guitars are mostly wrapped up.
What was the name of the band?
The band was called Highway 61. Yeah.
Okay. You cover a lot of Dylan, did you?
Well, I like to play mostly original, but we were inspired by classic rock heavily. Jimi Hendrix and Pink Floyd and Jimmy Page and the likes of those guitar maestros.
Okay. Well, I think we have to leave it there. Thanks very much for your time, for doing this. If folks have any other questions, you can send them to me at paul@concurrentmedia.com, and I'll try to get them to Arjun. And Ned, what do we have on tap?
So tomorrow we have a day off, and on Monday for our Business of Streaming Day, we have Bhavesh Upadhyaya from Discovery on the show. So join us at noon Pacific on Monday. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks, Arjun. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.